Hello, this is Brad Carmack, and I'm recording a rehearsal of my upcoming Mormon Transhumanist Association presentation entitled LDS Transsexual Policy, a Critique. The purpose of this rehearsal is to obtain feedback to help refine my presentation for the conference to be held on April 5th. First, let me ask a couple audience awareness questions. First, please raise your hand if you feel that you could articulate the difference between the terms transsexual, transvestite, and transgender. Okay, thanks. And your answers, of course, will help me to be able to customize my presentation to kind of the understanding of the audience here. Second, have you personally visited Transylvania? Okay, that was a joke. Third question, do you have a friend who is transgender? Okay, good to know. By myself, I gave a presentation on a related subject. My presentation was entitled Mormonism Beyond the Gender Binary last year at the same conference. I'm an attorney, a biologist, a feminist, and the last few years I've been an activist for LGBT Mormons. Let me quickly and briefly give an overview and outline of this presentation. First, I will discuss the relevance of LDS Transsexual Policy to this conference. Second, I will explain that policy. Third, I will critique the policy. And fourth, I will conclude that the policy should be deleted. So first, why is this subject relevant to this conference? The LDS Transsexual Policy subject is relevant because of the impacts of this policy on society in general, and the intersection of technology and religion, meaning that elective transsexual operation will become increasingly available and accessible by more people going forward, and this will have an effect on a number of conservative religions, including Mormonism, that place a high emphasis on the gender binary in one way or another, through marriage and governance practices, or through gender roles, etc. I've highlighted there the topics that I think are associated with the subject of LDS Transsexual Policy. So there's a lot of relevance and salience of this subject to the conference. I'm also going to, through the course of this presentation, I'm going to lay some of the groundwork for the claim that we should perceive God as a polygendered community rather than as a fundamental male. As a polygendered community rather than a fundamental male. And I will do so by arguing from the principle of free agency, which is common to both transhumanist guiding principles as well as Mormons guiding values. And I will argue, as I'll show in this next slide, that at the most we should affirm the decision of an individual to have a transsexual operation, and at the very least we should defer to that individual's choice rather than punish that individual's choice. And I will get more into depth as we go on. Okay, so I've talked about the relevance of LDS Transsexual Policy. Now let me explain what the policy is. I would anticipate that most people in this audience do not know the details of LDS Transsexual Policy. My source will be Handbook 1, which is supposed to only be in the possession of stake presidents and bishops. I have my own copy, which makes me quite happy. I'm going to show you pictures from my hard copy now. So, from the first section, Unusual Circumstances, 16.7.4, members who have undergone an elective transsexual operation may not, dun-dun-dun-dun, receive the priesthood. Okay, so you get a transsexual operation, you can't be ordained. This section comes from 3.3.4, issuing recommends in special circumstances. You can see that if you have a transsexual operation, you may not receive a temple recommend. So 1, you can't be ordained, 2, you can't get a recommend. Third, this section is when a disciplinary council may be necessary, 6.7.2 of Church Handbook 1, for stake presidents and bishops. If a bishop knows that a member in his ward is thinking about getting a transsexual operation, the bishop's supposed to tell him not to, and that if he goes through with it, he may be formally church disciplined, which means disfellowshipment or excommunication. And if the individual goes through with it and is disfellowshipped or excommunicated and wants to be undisfellowshipped or wants to be baptized and confirmed after being excommunicated, the individual has to receive First Presidency approval to be reinstated. There are only 7 situations that require First Presidency approval to be reinstated. Other notable ones include sexually abusing a child and murdering someone. So that gives you an idea for the gravity that LDS policy considers elective transsexual operation, as well as how negative they think it is. And again, this section comes from Applying for First Presidency Approval 6.12.10. Alright, from 16.3.3, Baptism and Confirmation Interviews. Let's say that you're not a member, you're an investigator, and you want to get baptized, but you had a transsexual operation. In that situation, a mission president has to do an interview and has to get authorization from the First Presidency. There are only 4 situations that require mission presidency interview accompanied by First Presidency approval to get baptized. 2 others include legal probation and murder. To recap, you have electoral transsexual operation, you can't receive the priesthood, can't receive a temple recommend, you may be formally church disciplined, and in order to get off formal church discipline and be reinstated, you require First Presidency approval, and if you're an investigator that wants to get baptized, you have to be interviewed by the mission president and receive First Presidency approval. That is the policy. Now, let's get into the beefy meat where I critique the policy. So, we know that from the implication of the policy is that transsexual operation is a very bad thing, what I'll call a big damn deal. Why is it such a big damn deal? Well, we know from the Founding Proclamation that gender is an essential characteristic. Of course, that begs the question, how do we tell if someone's spiritually male or spiritually female? By comparison, how do we tell someone's lineage? In that example, we do a patriarchal blessing and receive that lineage by revelation. How do we tell if somebody is spiritually worthy for a calling? Well, we get that by personal revelation. And those would be 2 examples of common Mormon practices of determining a spiritual attribute, of which spiritual gender is one. But when it comes to one's spiritual gender, I would ask, do we close our eyes and pray? Or do we instead scrutinize and look for an arm of flesh? The answer is that we look for an arm of flesh because in actual practice, birth genitalia is the litmus test that Mormons use for spiritual gender. That litmus test of genitalia at birth underlies a number of important Mormon practices. Our ordination procedure is built on it. Our marriage teachings are built on it. Our governance practice is built on it. You won't find anyone who at birth lacked a penis-length genital tubercle in any of the governing boards of the church, including the First Presidency, Quorum of the 12, stake presidencies, stake councils, or bishoprics. We do have an analogy to look to before. We've done the theology by anatomy routine in the past. We used to do the dimension of negroness rather than genital tubercle length. As you recall, negroness had to be less than a certain line in order to be able to be eligible to receive the priesthood. So, logically, why is transsexual operation such a big damn deal to LDS policymakers? Well, here's the logic. Spiritual sex, as the Founding Proclamation says, is essential. So it's an unchanging characteristic of a spirit. But the way that we determine someone's spiritual sex is by scrutinizing their genitals. Pull down your pants, we look at your crotch, and that's how we tell someone's spiritual sex. But later on in life, those genitals can be changed through surgery. So it's kind of a mind blower. How can the litmus test be changing? So the solution that Handbook 1 offers is to punish the mind blowers through depriving temple recommends, depriving priesthood, through church discipline, etc. And that policy unquestionably harms transgendered and transsexual individuals that are Mormons. You can read their heartbreaking stories on a number of blogs and also visit the Transgender Mormons and Allies Facebook group. To refresh and orient us here, I've discussed the relevance of LDS Transsexual Policy, I've explained and critiqued the policy, and I will conclude that the policy should be deleted. I'd like to humbly submit that it is the theology by anatomy policy itself that is sinful rather than the choice to undergo a transsexual operation, and I recommend that we delete all the language that refers to elective transsexual operations.